This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can pre-order Final Fantasy by using my link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone. In this video I'm continuing with my Final Fantasy Limited set review. I've already looked at all the multicolored and colorless cards, and in this video we'll look at all the white ones. For each of these cards I'll discuss how I think they'll perform in Limited, that means draft and sealed, and I'll punctuate each evaluation with a letter grade. If you're new to my set reviews and unsure of what my letter grades mean, you can find an explanation in the description. There are a few things to keep in mind as I review these cards. First, because we're only talking about draft and sealed, I'm only going to be talking about cards that can be found in play boosters. This set has some supplementary products that have cards that won't show up in play boosters, like cards from the starter pack. So if there's a card that you think is missing from this video, it's probably not in play boosters. I will be looking at the bonus sheet cards for this set in their own separate video after I get through the main set. These are also my evaluations of these cards before it's possible to play this limited format, since the goal is to have my set review ready for you in time for the pre-release, and that of course means I'll be wrong about some things, but as the format comes into focus, I'll make videos where I discuss how the format has panned out. Lastly, I want to let you know that there are some set review related perks for being a channel member or a patron. You get access to my ongoing set notes during preview season, and you'll also get a spreadsheet with all of my grades once the set review is complete. If those perks interest you, check out the description, where you can find out how to support the channel using one of those methods. Alright, without further ado, let's dive in with a look at the white cards in Final Fantasy. First up, we have Adalbert Steiner, which for one generic and a white is a 2/1 legendary human knight at uncommon. He's got lifelink, and he gets +1/+1 for each equipment you control. A 2-mana 2/1 with lifelink is an okay card, and the kind of card that loves to get buffed, and he comes with a built-in way to get it done. Equipping him while he's already getting a buff from an equipment being in play is going to feel especially nice. Even just having one in play makes this creature way better, and the amount of life gain potential he has can turn a race on its head, giving him a C+. Next up, it's Aerith Gainsborough, which for 2 generic and a white is a 2/2 legendary human cleric. At rare, she has lifelink. When you gain life, you put a +1/+1 counter on her. When she dies, you put X +1/+1 counters on each legendary creature you control, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Aerith Gainsborough. So a creature that starts as a Grey Ogre and doesn't have some sort of immediate effect does not have a good track record over the last few years. I mean, even 3-mana 2/3s that need you to do something in order to grow haven't been good in a while, so where does that leave us with Aerith? Well, if you can gain enough life, she's gonna be pretty good, and while her starting stats aren't good, if you can buff her and get in for some lifelink damage, you're gonna be pretty happy with how things play out, and she really only needs to be buffed a little bit so that she can start attacking and gaining life with her own lifelink. Her death trigger can also make a difference, as this set has more legendary creatures than most, but you still need to get those counters on her for that effect to be relevant at all, and even in a set with this many legendaries, you can't exactly count on your board being filled with them. That just isn't realistic. Overall, I think she's probably just a C+. If this set had a more prominent life gain theme, she'd be better, but it just doesn't, although she'll feel pretty good to play alongside Adalbert, who we just saw. But yeah, I think she's just a C+. White decks will be able to gain some life, so she's not horrendous, but I don't think most of them will gain enough for her to be a high-quality build-around or anything either. Next up, it's Aerith Rescue Mission, which for 3 generic and a white is a common sorcery, and it says choose one, create 3/1/1 colorless hero creature tokens, or tap up to 3 target creatures, put a stun counter on one of them. Neither mode is that good of a deal, but at least they're good in very different situations. Like if you're already wide enough, it's likely the second mode can be pretty good for you, and if you really need bodies, well, it can give them to you. If they were individual cards, I think the first mode would be like a C-, and the second one would probably be a D+, and I think getting a choice between the two of them is an upgrade to a C. Next up, it's Ambrosia Whiteheart, which for 1 generic and a white is a 2/2 legendary bird at uncommon. It's got flash, and when it enters, you may return another permanent you control to its owner's hand, and it also has landfall, which means something good happens when you have a land enter. In this case, Ambrosia Whiteheart gets +1/+0 until end of turn. A 2-mana 2/2 with flash isn't the most impressive thing in the world, but it's not terrible either, and creatures that let you bounce other permanents end up having a lot of applications. The sweetest thing is rebuying enters triggers or saving a creature from removal, but Ambrosia can also just return a land to be used for future landfall purposes. I'm giving this a C+. Next, it's Ash, Princess of Dalmasca, which for 2 generic and a white is a 3/2 legendary human rebel noble at uncommon. When she attacks, you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This stat line's pretty bad anytime we see it, but this attack trigger is really good, especially in a deck like blue-white, which will have enough artifacts to rarely whiff with this. Red-white likes equipment, so it's going to have some artifacts to hit too. And if you can attack with her and draw and force your opponent to trade with her, that will be a job well done. The bad news is she doesn't always have a worthwhile attack. She won't always hit something, even in an artifact deck, and if your opponent kills her before they get a trigger, which they can do for like 1 mana, you'll get blown out on mana, and all of that is super significant. She probably needs a build around grade. Most decks in the formats will have a few artifacts, but a few isn't really enough to make this a good card. She's probably a D in most white decks, and a C+ in a deck with enough artifacts. Next, it's Auron's Inspiration, which for 2 generic and a white is an uncommon instant. Attacking creatures get +2/+0 until end of turn, and it has flashback for 2 generic and 2 white, which means you can cast it from the graveyard for that cost and then exile it. Trumpet Blast and similar effects are always role players that can work out in a go-wide deck but are terrible everywhere else, and to be honest, even in a go-wide deck, they aren't that great. Just a buff like this is so situational, and it doesn't even work on defense in a pinch. Adding flashback helps and means in the late game you might cast both sides for a massive buff, and even casting it on back-to-back turns can be devastating, but overall I think this asks too much of you. The mass pump spells that are good also tend to give you a little something extra, or are actually good in situations other than when you attack with a bunch of creatures, but this doesn't really get there, so I think it's just a D. Next up, it's Battle Menu, which for 1 generic and a white is an uncommon instant, and it says choose one. Create a 2/2 white knight creature token. Target creature gets +0/+4 until end of turn. Destroy target creature with power 4 or greater, or you gain 4 life. This looks pretty good. It's carried mostly by the attack and magic modes. You're getting an okay deal on a 2/2 flash, or a pretty efficient removal spell that is a little bit restrictive, and those are nice slots to have one card fill. The other 2 modes will be good a lot less often, but when +0/+4 is useful, it can be pretty good, and having a way to gain life in an emergency certainly isn't downside. I think the utility here is enough for this to be a B-. Next, it's Cloud Midgar Mercenary, which for 2 white mana is a 2/1 legendary human soldier mercenary at Mythic Rare. When he enters, you search your library for an equipment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. And as long as Cloud is equipped, if an ability of Cloud or an equipment attached to it triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Just a 2 mana 2/1 that tutors up an equipment is pretty good in this set because there are lots of equipment lying around, and most of it is playable or better thanks to the job select mechanic, which makes a body for the equipment to get attached to. The double white does make him a little hard to play on curve, but that's fine. This card will feel pretty good at every point on the curve, and sometimes you'll even get extra value out of his trigger doubling effect, and when you do, it'll feel really absurd, but this is just a really good value card overall. I think he's a B+. Next up, it's Cloudbound Moogle, which for 3 generic and 2 white is a 2/3 Moogle at common. It's got flying. When it enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and it has plane cycling for 2 generic, which means you can pay that cost and discard it to search up a planes and put it into your hand. A 5 mana 2/3 flyer that puts a counter somewhere, including potentially on itself, so kind of has a floor as a 5 mana 3/4, isn't amazing. But because this has plane cycling, it's kind of okay, it's pretty medium. Now, granted, land cycling for 2 can be pretty awkward, and in the past I'd argue we've seen even more efficient 2 mana land cyclers not play that well, so this is probably just a C. Next, it's Coral, which for 1 generic and a white is a 2/2 cat beast at common. You can pay 1 generic and a white and tap it to tap target non-enchantment creature. This kind of ability used to be so good and limited, but these days it usually just doesn't perform that well. It's often irrelevant early, and in the late game, spending your mana on this is the kind of thing you do when you're desperate and you'd much rather be adding or subtracting from the board in a meaningful way than just tapping something down. It is a 2-drop, and it has upside, so it's not a terrible card, but I think it's probably just a C-. Next up, it's Crystal Fragments, which for 1 white mana is an uncommon artifact equipment. The equipped creature gets +1/+1, and it equips for 1 generic. You can also pay 5 generic and 2 white and exile it and return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control, activate only as a sorcery, and it comes back as Summon Alexander. This is one of the enchantment creature sagas in the set. This one is a 4/3 saga construct with flying. Chapters 1 and 2 prevent all damage that would be dealt to creatures you control this turn, and Chapter 3 taps all creatures your opponents control. A 1-mana equipment that gives +1/+1 and equips for 1 generic tends to be okay, especially in a set with an equipment and artifact theme in white. It's not great. It's like a C- level card at best, but this does get an upgrade for its ability to transform. Once it becomes Alexander, it will make it so that if you have any board at all, you can take some pretty free attacks as long as you're not leaving yourself open to really big backswing or something like that. And it can take advantage of Chapter 2 itself, assuming it's still around. It will be able to attack as a creature that can't have damage done to it. And then Chapter 3 taps everything down. Basically, all 3 of these chapters are there to kind of help you throw all of your creatures at your opponent, and that's often what you want to be doing with a white deck in the late game anyway, and it makes it a lot easier to do it. Now, all of that said, it costs a ton of mana. It really only gets to block twice and attack once by virtue of being a saga creature, and its effects really aren't that good if you're already behind or something like that. And if I'm spending 7 mana in the late game, I kind of would be a lot happier to have something more significant happen in my board than what this does. So even though there's like 2 sides on this card and there's a bunch of text, I think it probably just ends up being a C. Next up, it's the Crystal's Chosen, which for 5 generic and 2 white is an uncommon sorcery. Create 4 1/1 colorless hero creature tokens, then put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So the baseline here is 7 mana for 4 2/2 tokens. That's not great, but it's not a disaster, and chances are pretty darn good that you have some other creatures that will also get counters. Throw in the fact that the format has a bit of upside for the hero type, and this looks like an okay top curve card for white decks. I think it's a C+. Next up, it's Delivery Moogle, which for 3 generic and a white is a 3/2 Moogle at uncommon. It's got flying, and when it enters, you search your library and or graveyard for an artifact card with mana value 2 or less, reveal it and put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle. We've seen a lot of creatures like this lately, that is, inefficient creatures that can tutor you up something very specific, like Micromancer and Transit Mage, and they've all been really good. This is because they generate 2-for-1s, and Delivery Moogle might be the best one yet, mostly because of its ability to fly. That said, you do need a healthy number of cards for it to tutor up or get out of your graveyard for it to be worth it. Generally, just one artifact that fits the bill won't be enough. It's like a D+ in most white decks that probably do only have one artifact that can do the job. But when it becomes a 4-mana 3/2 flyer that draws you a card, it's just way, way better. Once you have 2 tutorable artifacts, it's solid, and after 3 or more, it gets to be really good. Because then it's not only likely to draw you a card, but you have options, making it even more powerful. So yeah, it needs a build-around grade, but it looks like this will probably work pretty nicely in both red-white and blue-white, red-white liking artifacts that are equipment, and blue-white liking artifacts more broadly. Next up, it's Dion, Bahamut's Dominant, which for 3 generic and a white is a 3/3 legendary human noble knight at rare. During your turn, Dion and other knights you control have flying, and he makes another knight because when he enters, he makes a 2/2 white knight creature token. So if we just stop there on this card, which has a whole lot of other text, it'd be a really good card. It'd be like a B in limited because you spend 4 mana for a 3/3 and a 2/2, and they have flying on your turn. And that's without even talking about other knights, but because it's one of these dominants, you know it can turn into a saga creature. In this case, you pay 4 generic, 2 white, tap it, and exile Dion, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control, activate only as a sorcery, comes back as Bahamut, Warden of Light, a 5/5 legendary enchantment creature saga dragon with flying. Both Chapter 1 and 2 put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control, and those creatures gain flying until end of turn. Chapter 3 destroys target permanent, and then you exile Bahamut and return it to the battlefield front face up, meaning you get that enters a trigger again if you get there. So yeah, this card's absurd. I'm, like I said, already very excited about just spending 4 mana on this card and getting what it gives me for 4 mana. And then later in the game, you can spend 6, buff your entire board, send it into the sky, do it again on the next turn. At that point, the game's probably over. But if it isn't, well, you can destroy their best permanent with Chapter 3, then get Dion back and do it all over again. So yeah, like all of these, they did a good job designing all of these so that even if you never transform them, they'd be really good cards in limited. But then when you do, they're just completely absurd. And I think this one might be the biggest bomb in the set. It's definitely in the neighborhood, giving it an A+. Next up, it's Dragoon's Lance, which for 1 generic and a white is an uncommon artifact equipment with job select. That means when it enters, you create a 1/1 colorless hero creature token and attach this equipment to it. The equipped creature gets +1/+0 and is a knight in addition to its other types. And during your turn, the equipped creature has flying, and this has equip for 4 generic. So a 2-mana 2/1 with flying only on your turn is like a solid 2-drop in aggro decks, and this has way more upside than that. Partly because if the creature you put it on ever dies, later in the game you can put it on something else. The creature doesn't even have to die, you can just move it to something else that can take more advantage of +1/+0 and flying on your turn, and putting that on something big in the later stages of the game is a pretty decent use of your mana. Top of that, it's an equipment, it's an artifact. Those are both things white decks are interested in. And this just looks like a really good 2-drop overall for white decks in the format, giving it a C+. Next up, it's Dwarven Castle Guard, which for 1 generic and a white is a 2/1 dwarf soldier at common, and when it dies, you make a 1/1 colorless hero creature token. Getting a 2/1 and a 1/1 for 2 mana is pretty good. I mean, getting them separately is a lot less impressive, but it means this is good sacrifice fodder, it feels good to trade with, and kind of helps you go wide. I think it's a C. Next, it's Fate of the Suncrest, which for 4 generic and a white is a common instant that costs 2 generic less to cast if it targets a tapped creature. Destroy target non-land permanent. So we've seen a lot of these cards perform well lately. That is, cards that let you spend less mana to kill a tapped creature, but can also be used to kill bigger stuff if you pay a bunch of mana. This one doesn't give you quite as big of a discount as the ones that only cost 2 to kill tapped things, but it's also more flexible than its predecessors since it can go after any non-land permanent when you pay full mana. In both cases, you're overpaying a little bit, but the flexibility is nice. I think this does fall short of being what I would consider premium removal, but the flexibility may prove to be enough for it to get there. But for now, I think it's a C+. Next up, it's From Father to Son, which for 1 generic and a white is a rare sorcery. Search your library for a vehicle card, reveal it, put it into your hand. If this card was cast from your graveyard, put that card onto the battlefield instead, then shuffle. Flashback for 4 generic and 3 white. So there are like a few vehicles in this set, but nowhere near enough for this to ever be a viable card. Paying 2 to tutor 1 to your hand, even in a set with lots of vehicles, would be pretty bad. Like, it can't be overstated how bad tutors are in limited that are super restrictive and aren't super cheap. Like, costing 2, one way to look at it is you're paying 2 extra mana for whatever vehicle it is, so the one you're grabbing better be pretty amazing, and in limited, that's just not going to be the case. And I think that's especially true in this set, where you just won't have vehicles that are worth it ever, so I think it's an F. Next up, it's Garaha Tia, which for 4 generic and a white is a 3/5 legendary creature cat archer at uncommon. It's got reach, and whenever 1 or more other creatures and or artifacts you control die, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. This stat line plus reach makes for a kinda passable defensive creature, and this trigger is pretty good. You can often cast this and make some attacks that previously would have been pretty medium that now involve your opponent letting you draw a card. Notably, it doesn't say non-token or anything like that, so it's especially good with tokens. I'm giving it a C+. Next, it's Galacat, which for 2 generic and a white is a 1/3 cat at common. It's got flying and vigilance, and as long as you control 2 or more artifacts, it gets +2/+0. A 3-mana 1/3 with flying and vigilance isn't really what you want to be doing in limited, but this does become a 3/3 and potentially in the early-ish game if you have some cheap artifacts. A 3-mana 1/3 with flying and vigilance is like a D at best in limited, but a 3-mana 3/3 with flying and vigilance is a C+ or even a B-. I think in the end you end up with a C here. It is the kind of card I could give a build-around grade to, but the ceiling on it isn't insane and the floor isn't terrible, so I think it would be a little excessive to go full-on build-around grade here. Next up, it's Machinist's Arsenal, which for 4 generic and a white is a rare artifact equipment with job select. The equipped creature gets +2/+2 for each artifact you control and is an artificer in addition to its other types, and this can equip for 4 generic. So this counts itself, so when it comes down, it's a 5-mana 3/3 at worst. That's not a good starting point, but as long as you have 1 other artifact in play, you're going to feel fine, and this can offer an absolutely massive buff sometimes. This is one that needs a build-around grade because if you're in one of the white decks that isn't red-white or blue-white, this is probably going to be a lot worse, like a D+ in a deck that just has a handful of artifacts. But if you're going hard on them, I think this is as good as a B+. Next up, it's Magitech Armor, which for 3 generic and a white is a 4/4 artifact vehicle at uncommon. When it enters, you create a 1/1 colorless hero creature token, and it has crew 1. So we've seen cards like this before, you know, a vehicle that's not like insanely efficient, but gives you a body that can crew it. And we've seen those be pretty good. And I think this one is. I mean, you get 2 permanents out of it. One of them happens to be an artifact. And I think this ends up giving you what you need for the amount of mana you're spending. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Magitech Infantry. This is 1 white mana for a 1/1 artifact creature robot soldier at common. This creature gets +1/+0 as long as you control another artifact, and you can pay 2 generic and a white and search your library for a card named Magitech Infantry, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. I really like collect 'em all cards when they're well designed, and I think this one is. You know, we had the 3 mana 2/2 flyer in the last set that was a pretty big dud, but I don't think this one's going to be. Grabbing other copies of itself and putting them on the battlefield is pretty legit and results in this generating tons of card advantage. Like, it is frequently just better on turn 3 to pay 3 and grab another Magitech Infantry. For one thing, they'll both become 2/1s, and you can just keep snowballing from there without using any resources in your hand. This is all, of course, provided you have other Magitech Infantries around. But then you throw in the fact that it's also a 1 mana artifact in a format with a white artifact deck, and this is just a really solid build around. If you've only got one, it's probably like a D, and that's in like an artifact deck. But I think if you have 4 or more of them, it's as good as a B-. Next up, it's Minwu White Mage, which for 3 generic and 2 white is a 3/3 legendary human cleric at rare with vigilance and lifelink, and whenever you gain life, you put a +1/+1 counter on each cleric you control. So this is another rare card that has some life gain stuff going on, which isn't really a theme you see much of at lower rarities, which makes cards like this a lot less good. I mean, a 5 mana 3/3 with vigilance and lifelink just isn't that good. It is nice that it buffs itself and your other white mages, also known in Magic as clerics, when it does damage, but it's too much of a sub-theme for me to feel like you can even consistently build around this, because you need to be grabbing other cards that gain you life a significant chunk of the time, and other payoffs, and all the payoffs are rare, like Aerith Gainsborough and this, and sometimes that'll all come together. But usually when I give a card a build-around grade, it's because I think that it has legitimate potential as a build-around and is something you're going to see in the format happen, whereas I don't see this card working out in the format very often. So I think it's just a D. Next up, it's Moogle's Valor, which for 3 generic and 2 white is a rare instant. For each creature you control, create a 1/2 white Moogle creature token with lifelink. Then creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. This has a super high ceiling, but also a pretty bad floor. Spending 5 on this and getting like 2 tokens isn't going to be great, even with lifelink and indestructibility in the mix. I mean, that's okay, but you'd be surprised how infrequently you can accomplish something with a card like this when you don't have a board, and that's definitely a problem. I think it's dangerous to look at this and think you'll always get a bunch of creatures and you'll be able to ambush block something super hard and gain a bunch of life. It will do that sometimes, don't get me wrong, and you can even use it on your turn. It's not an ambush block situation, but to save your creatures and then add a bunch of Moogles to the board. I'm not saying this is like a bad card. I don't think it will be, because most of the time you're going to have enough creatures around for this to do something. But I just want to keep people from looking at this and thinking about that ideal case where you make a bunch of bodies with indestructible that have, now you gain life when you block their stuff, and you kill everything they have. It's not going to line up that way all the time. Sometimes you're going to have to settle for like 5 mana, make 2 1/2s, and maybe do some blocking. And that's not nearly as good of a card as the other one, even though obviously it's the same card. So I think this is a B+. I don't think it's a full-on bomb because of its limitations. Next up, it's Paladin's Arms, which for 2 generic and a white is a common artifact equipment with job select. The equipped creature gets +2/+1 and has ward 1, and is a knight in addition to its other types, and this has equip 4. We saw a really similar card in Phyrexia All Will Be One, Gold Warden's Helm, and that wasn't very good. The end result was the same, a 3 mana 2/3 with ward 1, but the Helm was a worse equipment that was cheaper to equip, but it made a better token because it made a 2/2. And that format had an equipment theme just like this one, and the Helm was a really mediocre card. I imagine this will be similar. I mean, 3 mana for a 3/2 with ward 1 just isn't exciting, and moving this to other things for 4 doesn't appeal to me a ton, so I think it's probably a D+. Next up, it's Phoenix Down, which for 1 white mana is an uncommon artifact. You pay 1 generic and a white, tap it, and exile this artifact, and you choose one. Return target creature card with mana value 4 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, or exile target skeleton, spirit, or zombie. Despite being one of the most powerful items in the Final Fantasy games, this doesn't look that good in Limited. Most of the time, you have to lean on the reanimation effect, and it's narrow enough and slow enough that I'm not especially excited about that. I think it's a D. Next, it's Restoration Magic, which for 1 white mana is an uncommon instant with tiered. This means you choose 1 additional cost. It's basically like Kicker, but you can only choose 1 of these. One of them costs 0, and target permanent gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So you pay 1 white and that's what you get. You can pay 1 generic instead on top of the white mana, and the permanent gains hexproof and indestructible and you gain 3 life. Or you can pay 3 generic and a white instead, and permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn and you gain 6 life. So the best mode here in terms of efficiency is just the first one. Paying 1 mana to blank a removal spell and win combat sometimes is a good deal. Sinking more mana into it does make the effect better, but part of what makes the first mode so good is it's so easy to leave mana up for. Still, the other modes are upside on a card we've seen be perfectly solid before, and sometimes Curaga will be super game-breaking, although you should really not expect that to happen all the time. You have to have something really destructive happen when you have the mana up at the exact right time for it to really have this sort of game-breaking effect, and that doesn't happen as often as you'd think. Overall, I think this is a C. Next up, it's Side Quest Catch a Fish, which for 2 generic and a white is an uncommon enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's an artifact or creature card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you put a card into your hand this way, create a food token and transform this enchantment. Then it becomes Cooking Campsite, a land that can tap for white, and you pay 3 generic, tap it, and sack an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery. So, we've already seen white has an artifact theme in this set, but this card worries me in a pretty big way. It's a 3 mana enchantment that does nothing up front and isn't even guaranteed to do something on the next turn. And when it doesn't, it's kind of disastrous. And even once it transforms, you need to have a decent board to make giving up that food worthwhile. If this always drew you a card and gave you a food on your next upkeep and then transformed, it would be a really great card. That would make it worth the downside of not adding anything to the board on turn 3. But it's going to whiff too often for me to want to run this most of the time in this format. If the format's really slow, maybe it's better, but I'm thinking this is a D. Next up, it's Slash of Light, which for 1 generic and a white is a common instant that deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control plus the number of equipment you control to target creature. We see a card like this in almost every set these days, it seems, and they always tend to be solid or better. They're conditional, but in most white decks you can make this an efficient enough removal spell for you to feel fine about running it. This does work particularly well with the job select mechanic, which always gives you an equipment and a creature, so every job select card can contribute 2 damage to this. So I think this might even be a little bit better than the other ones we've seen. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Snow Villiers, which for 2 generic and a white is a star 3 legendary human rebel monk at uncommon. It's got vigilance and its power is equal to the number of creatures you control. So if you can make this a 3/3 or bigger consistently, it'll feel solid, but because it always has 3 toughness, it's not usually going to feel like a world beater, even with vigilance, so I think it's just a C. Next up, it's Stiltskin, Moogle Merchant, which for 1 white mana is a 1/2 legendary Moogle at rare. It's got lifelink, and you can pay 2 generic and tap it, and target opponent gains control of another target permanent you control. If they do, you draw a card. So playing this on 1 isn't too bad, as it can get in for some damage and gain you some life. It also holds equipment and other buffs well, and those are in this set. And then later in the game, you can start donating stuff to your opponent for value. Basically, in Limited, you're only going to want to give up excess lands most of the time, but there are some other funny things you can do with permanents where it doesn't matter who controls them, like auras or enchantments, for example, and sometimes giving an opponent a token or something is worth it too. It's unlikely to ever feel amazing whether you play it on turn 1 or get it late and start donating stuff, but it's never going to feel bad either, I don't think, so I think it's a C+. Next up, it's Summon Chocomog, which for 2 generic and a white is a 3/3 enchantment creature Saga Bird Moogle, and it has 4 chapters and they're all exactly the same. Other creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. I think this is a pretty good common. A 3 mana 3/3 with just this as an enters trigger would be an okay card, but offering that buff on every turn is a big upgrade, even on a card with an expiration date. And because this saga has 4 chapters, you do get 2 attacks and 3 blocks out of it, making it last longer than most of the other Saga creatures. Although, obviously, this one's also a lot less scary since it's just a 3-mana 3/3. But for a common, this looks like a high-quality card to me. I'm giving it a C+. Next, it's Summon Knights of Round, which for 6 generic and 2 white is an enchantment creature Saga Knight. It's an indestructible 3/3. It has 5 chapters, and the first 4 all create 3/2/2 White Knight creature tokens. So that's crazy. And then chapter 5 says other creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. Put an indestructible counter on each of them. So this card's nuts. You do need 8 mana to get, that is a real setup cost. White's not exactly known for ramping, although as we'll see, there is actually like a mana rock / removal spell in white that might make this a little better, especially because it's a common. But man, this is the kind of thing you want to spend 8 mana on because it is very, very unlikely you ever lose the game when you cast this. It immediately adds 4 bodies to the board, including its own indestructible body, which also means your opponent's not going to stop the Saga from going off in most cases, and it's going to keep adding more tokens to the board. Your opponent probably scoops before any of this other stuff happens, but eventually you have a board filled with knights. Even if you never had anything else on the board, they also all get bigger and become permanently indestructible. So yeah, this card is nuts. It is the 8 mana bomb that you want to play. I do think the whole 8 mana thing is a real downside, and I do think it keeps me from being like, this is a solid A. I mean, if it was green, it would be an A, maybe even an A+, but in white, I think A- is the best I can do. If the format's really slow, it will be an A+, but most formats aren't, and white usually isn't a color known for getting to 8 mana. Next, it's Summon Primal Garuda, which for 3 generic and a white is an enchantment creature, Saga Harpy. It's a 3/3 flyer at uncommon. Chapter 1 deals 4 damage to target tapped creature an opponent controls. Chapter 2 and 3 both give target creature you control +1/+0 and flying until end of turn. So, Chapter 1 will kill something. It's not always going to be what you want to kill the most, because it has to have 4 toughness or less, be tapped, but it kills something. Then, on the next turn, you'll get to send something else into the air, and hopefully also attack with Primal Garuda. Then on the next turn, you send something else into the air and can hopefully attack with it. I think pretty much all of these summons are pretty good, but I'm not like super high on this one, especially for the uncommon cycle, mostly because Chapter 1 just will not kill what you want it to kill often enough. When it does, it's going to feel great, but there are going to be times where it just can't kill something, and you have to play this because it's your only 4-drop, and you have to run it out there and kill something that doesn't matter that much. And then you don't necessarily get a full card worth of value from Primal Garuda after Chapter 1, because having a 3/3 flyer that can attack once and sending a couple of other things into the sky isn't necessarily going to result in anything significant happening. It can, and there's a lot of potential here. And I'm not saying I don't like this card. I do. It's just there's an uncommon cycle like this, and I think all the others are probably better than this one, and this one's just a C+. Next, it's Ultima, which for 3 generic and 2 white is a rare sorcery. It says destroy all artifacts and creatures in the turn. So while the in the turn thing is fun text to have, and I'm sure it's a flavor thing, it actually makes this sweeper worse for the most part. This is because it doesn't give you an opportunity to cast anything after you clear the board, and that often means allowing your opponent to rebuild the board before you ever get a chance to. And that's not really where you want to be. This effect is undoubtedly powerful, and grindy control decks in the format can find a use for this, but it's going to be awkward a huge chunk of the time, so I think it's just a C+. Next up, it's Venat, which for 1 generic and 2 white is a 3/3 legendary Elder Wizard at rare. Whenever you cast a legendary spell, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn, and you can pay 7 generic and tap her to exile target non-land permanent and transform Venat, activate only as a sorcery. Then she becomes Hydaelyn, Mother Crystal, a legendary god that is indestructible, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. Until your next turn, that creature gains indestructible, and if it's legendary, draw a card. This format certainly has enough legendary permanents for her to be able to draw you cards, and her ability to remove a non-land permanent and turn into an absolutely terrifying creature, an indestructible one that buffs your board and still draws you cards, makes her really powerful. You don't need that many legendary spells for her to be really good, so I don't think you have to look at her as a pure build-around. Like, even if your deck only has 3 legendary spells, she's still a 3-mana 3/3 with absolutely amazing upside, and I think that makes her a bomb, giving her an A-. Next, it's Weapons Vendor, which for 3 generic and a white is a 2/2 Human Artificer at common. When it enters, you draw a card, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control an equipment, you may pay 1 generic. When you do, attach target equipment you control to target creature you control. So, I like creatures that draw me a card when they enter, but this one is expensive enough that I don't feel great about it. Its other ability will sometimes let you move an equipment at a discount, but it won't always be a significant one or a relevant effect. I think this is just a C-. Next, it's White Aura Sight, which for 2 generic and 2 white is a common artifact. When it enters, you exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until this artifact leaves the battlefield, and you can tap it and add 1 white. So this costs more than most Oblivion Ring effects do, and double white means you're not going to be splashing it, but I think it makes up for both of those things by both being an artifact, which matters, and producing mana. I think this ends up being premium removal because of its ability to produce mana. You know, it's not the removal effect alone that makes it premium, but you're getting something extra that is pretty significant. So I think this is a B-. Next, it's the Wind Crystal, which for 2 generic and 2 white is a rare legendary artifact. White spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast. If you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead. And you can pay 4 generic and 2 white and tap it, and creatures you control gain flying and lifelink until end of turn. This crystal cycle is one that I think people are going to be super pumped about for other formats, but don't get pumped about them in Limited. Cards that give you a discount like this, especially on turn 4, rarely work well in Limited unless they add to the board somehow, and the Wind Crystal doesn't get there. This means you're mostly leaning on the rest of the card, and as we've talked about, there's not so much life gain in the set at lower rarities that you can really go off with it. But the good news about this crystal is that its activated ability can be pretty legit. You do need a decent board, but there are a lot of board states later on in games in Limited where if you could give your whole board flying and lifelink and gain double the life from the lifelink, it would really improve things for you. Now, it does need you to have a built-out board. If you're behind, this is a miserable card to draw off the top of your deck. It doesn't feel good to play this on turn 4 when it doesn't add to the board at all. And again, the discount just isn't a very relevant effect in Limited overall. So it still has a ton of problems, but compared to the other crystals, I think this one is actually one that can make your deck. I mean, and white does have enough random life gain that occasionally doubling it will matter, but this one's probably still just a C. Next, it's You're Not Alone, which for 1 white mana is a common instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If you control 3 or more creatures, it gets +4/+4 until end of turn instead. This is a solid trick. 1 mana for +2/+2, usually a D+ or C- level trick, so a decently playable one, mostly because it lets you win combat for only 1 mana a significant chunk of the time. 1 mana for +4/+4 is way better though. It allows almost anything to punch above its weight class, in addition to the upside of sometimes just finding you lethal out of nowhere. The 3 creature requirement isn't automatic, but it's not hard to get there either in white. Basically, it's a mediocre trick in the early game, but from the mid-game on, it's a really good one. This is going to be a trick that white aggro decks are playing a couple of copies of, giving it a C. And our last white card is Zac Fair, which for 1 white mana is a 0/1 legendary human soldier at uncommon. He enters with a +1/+1 counter, and you can pay 1 generic and sacrifice him. Target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. Put Zac Fair's counters on that creature and attach an equipment that was attached to Zac Fair to that creature. So this is a 1 mana 1/2 more or less with a very useful activated ability. I mean, we always love combat tricks that give a counter and indestructibility for 1 mana, and while having this effect on the board is a little bit worse than having it in your hand, it also means this adds to the board before you ever use its ability. Sometimes you'll even be able to move equipment. I wouldn't count on that part coming up a ton or being relevant a ton, but the indestructibility plus here's a counter is very relevant to have for 1 mana on a creature you spent very little mana on to begin with. So I think he actually looks pretty good. Like, running this out on turn 1 is going to feel good in a lot of games. Your opponent has to burn removal on it a lot of the time, because if they don't, you're going to use it to blank another removal spell later, giving this a B-. So those are all the white cards in Final Fantasy. In the next video, I'll look at all the blue ones. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to make sure you're all caught up on this set review, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.